Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. It's time for the C3 stream. Hello everybody. Welcome, good evening, welcome to the C3 stream. Hope you got a cup of tea nearby, a Bible, and the torture device. Wow, you ever guys use one of these? I'm using one of these. Oh, these things. I got it from my wife. Oh, but I keep using it. Wow. So Tuesday's like the long day. But this thing's awesome. I just been sitting in this chair all day doing Zoom meetings. Now it's the highlight of my day. I gotta hang out with you guys. But wow. Do you guys ever use one of these things? Holy cow, they're working out the kinks. So I figured I would sit here and we'd talk about the Bible while I get a little back massage. That's pretty cool. That's a good deal for me. If you got your Bible handy, fabulous. If you got a cup of tea, or actually I got decaf tonight. I got decaf coffee tonight. And your local little, what are these called? Like, they got a fancy name, a Japanese name. Hibachi? Something like that. A little massager. Woo! This sucker is working. Hey, Hannah Thompson, Mike Shalley, you should join us. Thanks for tagging them. That's a good call. Joe's here. Hey, guess what, guys? Today, I shouldn't say tonight because it's been all day, but today has been John Harrell's birthday. So, John, if you are a regular. If you're tuning in, happy birthday, John. Hope you're having a great birthday today. You're a regular guy who tunes in all the time. Joe, good call. Tagging Hannah and Mike. They would like this. Well, grab your coffee, grab your Bible. You guys ready to rock and roll? It's week 5? I think it's week 5, right? Week 5 of what we're going through. Systematically looking at the Bible. I don't know. Systematically makes it sound fancy. Walking through the biblical narrative. Maybe that's a better way to say it. Yeah, right? It's his happy birthday. Totally. It's John Harrell's birthday. John, 25, never looked so good. Yeah. Wow, this thing is like really going to town on my neck. Alright, this is going to be way too distracting. I was hoping I could just do this, but there's no way. It's way too distracting. Alright. So let's do our little intro video before we dive into the divine drama. You ready? All right, I feel good now. I'm loose. I got a little back massage. I got a cup of decaf. Good to go, man. Let's rock and roll, people. Welcome to the C3 stream. Thanks for hanging out on Tuesday nights. It's Tuesday night teaching, which means we are going through a curriculum called the Divine Drama. We're looking at characters. We're looking at biblical stories. We're looking at thematic overtures that you can find, tracing out all sorts of stuff in the biblical narrative. So, if you ever miss a week, no big deal. Go back, watch them on YouTube, Facebook. You can dig them up. We're going to be doing more Bible stuff tonight, actually looking at the text. Sometimes we have pictures that go along with all this stuff that we're doing, and other nights we spend a little bit more time in the Bible. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry about it. I'm going to be using Bible Gateway, and I'll bring that up for us on the screen, so you can track along with us there. So let's do that. Wow. This is where we left off. Do you guys remember this? This is a good deal. So what this is, and just a quick recap for you, we started with Adam and looking at the story, tracing the family heritage down through the big character, Abraham. Abraham's a huge character. He's a big name in the Bible, and what he sets in place for us is really the redemption narrative, salvation, and how God is going to use the covenant promise that he extends he gives to Abraham, and through Abraham, then he is going to enact his saving plan for the world. And so we traced kind of the lineage of Abraham. We were looking at some other stuff before that, but most recently we were looking at how Abraham is a descendant, and we can kind of trace some of the stories. But then Abraham has a really complex, interesting story. He is one interesting guy. He has some ups and a whole lot of downs. He's a messy dude. That's one of the things we like about him, is that he's messy, just like us. Yeah, he's a cool guy. But he ends up eventually with two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. God's promise, God's blessing, I don't know how you describe it. Yeah, the promise, the blessing, the work of redemption follows through Isaac, who is, according to Genesis, the rightful son of Abraham and his first wife, Sarah. Okay. Ishmael comes, if you remember, there's this really weird thing that goes on with Sarah's servant, maid servant, where they tried to do this whole Abraham and Hagar, the maidservant, get married and have Ishmael, and then Sarah says, I'll just raise the kid as my own. God says, no, that is not the plan. Abraham, I promised that you would have kids. You're going to have a kid from Sarah, with Sarah, even though you're really old and they didn't have the blue pill back then. It's going to happen. And much to Abraham and Sarah's significant surprise, I mean, Sarah literally laughs out loud when God says he's going to do this. She literally laughs out loud and ends up actually naming her son Isaac, which means he laughs, or laughter. Because it happens. She has a kid in her old age. The biological clock was ticking away, and yet supernaturally she is able, because of God's work and intervention, to have her son Isaac. So she has Isaac. The story continues then through Isaac, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those are considered the three patriarchs, and that's why we're spending a little bit more time on the patriarchs. They are kind of the figureheads and the formers of the Jewish faith. These three guys make up kind of the baseline of all that follows, right? So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And even as we go into the story, as we go deeper into the narrative, we'll hear that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That refrain will come up over and over and over and over again. So Abraham's son Isaac is the one that the promise, God's work of redemption, follows through. Abraham is an interesting experience with Isaac. Kind of the big first time we get Isaac really on the scene is when he's still a boy or when he's a young man. We're not entirely sure. But there's this exchange where God tests Abraham, saying, hey, go up to the mountain, bring your son, and when you get to the top of the mountain, sacrifice your son. And it's kind of like a, what? Come again? He's the child of the promise. This defeats the whole purpose, God. We just worked really hard for bringing him into the world. We've been waiting our whole lives for Isaac. And now you want me to sacrifice him? Like, you gave him to me. Why in the world would you sacrifice him? But, okay, I'll trust you. So Abraham goes up to the top of the mountain, brings Isaac with him. And at the top of the mountain, at the last moment, God says, no, just kidding. I wanted to see your level of dedication and what it means for you to believe in me and my ability to work and to heal and to save and so forth. And so, no, don't kill Isaac. Instead, I want you to kill the ram that's caught in the thicket next door. And, Abraham looks over. Sure enough, there's a ram stuck in some weeds, got its horns caught in the weeds. And so he sacrifices the ram instead of his son Isaac. Good deal, Isaac. Woo! Imagine, talk about an awkward one, hanging out with Dad, going for an afternoon hike up the mountain. So, Dad, where are we going? Apparently, according to the scriptures, they like actually have a conversation. They talk. He's like, hey, where's the sacrifice? So, like, here's Isaac carrying the wood. You got old Abraham and Isaac, the young guy. The young guy's carrying the wood for the sacrifice. The idea being that you go up there, you make a sacrifice, and then you burn the sacrificial animal. You burn certain portions of them as That's what the ritual sacrifice was. And so he's literally carrying wood that he's about to be sacrificed up on the mountain. That's a rough go of it. But as it turns out, God's got big plans for Isaac. So let's get to know Isaac. What do you say? Shall we? Genesis is the first book of the Bible, and that's where we've been stuck in. Genesis 22 talks about Isaac's sacrifice. And shortly thereafter, Isaac grows up, and in Genesis 24, we get a story about Isaac finding and getting a wife. What do you say? Shall we read it together? Because this is actually big stuff. Here we go. Family Guy, Abraham. Oh, I haven't watched that. I'll have to watch it. Caution adult language. Yeah, I would imagine that there's probably some expletives going on in between Isaac and his dad as they're walking up the mountain thinking, what is going on? But lo and behold, God intervened. Good thing. All right, here we go. Genesis 24. Abraham was now a very old man. All right, so he is aged. And the Lord had blessed him in every way. So God has already begun to work in such a way that, you know, Abraham is recognizing what God promised to him so long ago is coming to fruition. One day, Abraham said to his oldest servant, the man in charge of his household, take an oath by putting your hand under my thigh. Yeah, it's a little weird. It's how things were done back then. It's a rabbit hole we don't need to get into. Swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, that you will not allow my son to marry one of these local Canaanite women. That's the issue. The local hotties, the local ladies, not so much. Abraham is insistent that Isaac cannot, must not, should not marry one of the local women. Why in the world would that be? Why wouldn't, Abraham be thrilled to have his son settle down with a local lady? Why in the world is that the case? Well, it's because of all that's going to follow in the coming years. This becomes the chief issue of the Jewish people. You see what happens? It's very practical. If you marry the local man or woman, if you marry a local, that local in the Canaanite land is worshiping local Canaanite gods. It's that simple. Canaanite people have Canaanite culture. They have Canaanite values. They have Canaanite practices, influences, and ultimately they have Canaanite gods. So, if you marry a local, you get the full package, which includes Canaanite religion. Abraham wants nothing to do with local indigenous Canaanite religion. He has been set aside for the work of his God, and so he doesn't want his son to have to wrestle with this idea of intermarriage with a different religion that's going to be really hard for his wife, his future wife, to leave behind, right? Because that's the idea here, is Isaac would marry someone and introduce that person to their God, their family God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's going to be a lot easier to do that if you get an out-of-towner than it is someone local, because the local one is going to continue to see oh yeah, that's growing up, that's where we worshiped that God. And oh yeah, when we went, on the family pilgrimage when growing up, that's where we would worship that God. And so if you marry the local, it's going to be a lot harder to break the cycle of religious practice than it is as if you get somebody from out of town. So he goes instead to my homeland. This is Abraham talking. So the homeland would have been out east, land of Ur, or at least Haran, kind of like Iraq, Iran. So go to the nomadic tribes out east, to my relatives, and find a wife there for my son Isaac. Okay, don't get caught up in the whole relatives thing, all right? Things were different back then. Don't get caught up in it. Basically, he's saying, I want you to go back to the nomadic tribes from where we came, find somebody that we know, and find a wife. And that's what the servant does. There's like this whole exchange that happens. Let's see if where do we meet her? Yep, here we go. There's a whole exchange that happens with the servant going out there. He prays, all this sort of stuff happens. And lo and behold, he prays that God would show him the right woman. And he does. It is a young woman named Rebecca. Young woman named Rebecca. She was the daughter of Bethuel, who was the son of Abraham's brother Nahor and his wife Milcah. Rebecca was very beautiful and old enough to be married, but she was still a virgin. She went down to the spring, filled her jug, came up again, running over, please give me a little water. So the servant sets up like a test, says, dear God, I have no idea who the right person is. Can you show me? Let the right person offer to you know, if it's the right person, God, let that gal give me a drink from water and my camels too. And that's exactly what happens. The camels drink, and he finds out who she is, and he's like, oh my goodness, praise the Lord, the God of my master Abraham. The Lord has shown unfailing love and faithfulness to my master, for he has led me straight to my master's relatives, aka straight to somebody that is of marriageable age and is acceptable. And boom, it's pretty much done. It's a fast experience. Back then, the young woman ran home to tell her family everything had happened. Rebecca has a brother named Laban. We will meet this guy later. We'll meet Uncle Laban. We'll meet Laban. He's Rebecca's brother later on when we get into Jacob's story. So, yep. So if you track it through, then Isaac then all of a sudden has a wife and is old enough to be married, has a wife. He ends up marrying Rebecca. She's a beautiful woman. Actually, you know, it's fascinating. Let me see if I can find it. When he meets them, there's some back and forth. There it is. Isaac sets eyes on Rebecca, and he's absolutely astonished. Thinks she's gorgeous, loves her. And it says in verse 67, Isaac brought Rebecca into his mother Sarah's tent. She became his wife. He loved her deeply, and she was a special comfort to him after the death of his own mother. So Sarah passes away. Sorry, footnote. Sarah passes away. I guess Sarah's passing is probably not a footnote. Sorry. Sarah passes away, and then all of this transpires. It is followed then by the death of Abraham in chapter 25. Abraham has other sons, he has other daughters, he has other concubines and other wives, but the one that he is focused on, and the one that his lineage and God's promise and all of his inheritance moves to, is Isaac. And so he leaves everything he owns to Isaac, and he dies at a ripe old age. He's buried next to his wife, Sarah. And now the story really shifts entirely to Isaac. And Isaac's story is really the one that's already been told. The bulk of Isaac's narrative comes from him going up the mountain with his father. It comes through a story about his sons and what happens with his sons, Jacob and Esau. And finally, in chapter 26, let's find it. God speaks to him personally. Yep, here we go. All right, so in chapter 26, you find God actually speaking directly and interacting directly with Isaac. This is the first time God really gets in Isaac's face personally. The Lord appeared to Isaac. Okay, so there's a famine. So one of the big things that happens in ancient Israel regularly is famine. To this day, one of the big things that happened in the early 1900s when the Zionist movement got going, and as you get into the 1940s and 50s, particularly in the 50s and 60s, when they started developing modern day Israel, the big issue was irrigation and farming. There's not a lot of farmable land, And so that you feel that even in the ancient biblical narrative that, man, if famine strikes, woo, it's pretty deserty out there. It's pretty empty out there. So what little food they're able to garner for themselves is so precious and so important. And so famine strikes the land, and God shows up and speaks to Isaac directly. He says, look, don't go down to Egypt. Side note, just from memory, they have bad history with Egypt. Abraham had gone to Egypt before and had tried to pass his wife Sarah off as his sister, and bad stuff happens. Egypt has the Nile and therefore has food year-round, basically. Food is plentiful in Egypt throughout the Bible. So the idea is anytime there's a famine in Israel, you take a trip down south and try to get some goods out of Egypt. God says, don't do that. Instead, I want you to do this. Live here as a foreigner in the land, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. I hereby confirm that I will give all these lands to you and your descendants, just as I solemnly promised Abraham, your father. All right, so what he's doing is he's reiterating and really kind of formally passing on to Isaac the same promise the original promise that he gave to his father, Abraham. God promised Abraham all these incredible things. Do you remember? He promised him land, he promised him descendants, and that he would be a blessing to the rest of the world. God says in here, Genesis 26, that, okay, Isaac, just like I promised that to your father, it's now traveling through you. That blessing and that promise, you inherited that as much as you inherited your father's tent and his wealth and all that sort of stuff. You inherited your father's favor in my eyes. I will cause your descendants to become as numerous as the stars in the sky. I will give them all these lands, and through your descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. There you go. That's the promise. That's the Abrahamic covenant and promise. Land, descendants, all the earth will be blessed. I will do this because Abraham listened to me and obeyed all my requirements, command, decrees, and instructions. Abraham was good to me. I made those promises to him. I'm not going to fail Abraham, God basically says. So, to show you how messy the family is, though, this is immediately followed by Isaac acting like his dad and passing his wife, Rebecca, off as his sister. Okay, to one of the local Philistines. That means local Canaanite armies. So, messy family. Messy family. And increasingly, one of the things that we've kind of been skipping over here, but is important, is increasingly we are finding conflict with the locals on the rise. More and more we find Abraham fighting with the locals. Isaac ends up fighting with the locals. The locals are Canaanites. They are Philistines. They are if you look at this genetic map, if you will, the Canaanites coming from Ham, bad guys, Midianites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, the Amalekites, all those ites in there, they the bad guys. They're the ones that the Jewish people end up fighting over and over and over again. The Canaanites themselves break out into further tribes, and the most notable one goes by the term Philistine. The Philistines hung out right on the coastline, and the Philistines were really impressive, and they were a big deal because they had chariots from an early age. They were able to steal the technology of chariots from Egypt. Egypt was the kind of the leader in the chariot, mounted chariot. This is a big deal. I mean, it's kind of like the tank of the ancient world, okay? I mean, when you're fighting literally with slings and stones, being able to work metal into a chariot and figure out how to make chariots was seriously like a tank, okay? So it was a big deal. Fighting the Philistines was tough. So you find increasing violence there and increasing tension. So that's Isaac's story. Isaac continues to grow older, and just as Abraham passed his lineage, promises, all the good stuff on to Isaac, Isaac also passes on to his sons God's blessing. He has two sons, Esau and Jacob. You can see it there, Esau and Jacob. And they're twins, And man, they are some scrappy twins, you know? Man, let's read about it because it's too fun not to. Let's read about the twins. This is the births of Esau and Jacob. I am in 25. Yeah. This is Genesis 25. Isaac has 2 boys with Rebekah. First off, Rebekah has trouble getting pregnant, just like Sarah had trouble. But so Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was unable to bear children. The Lord answers Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah becomes pregnant with twins. Not just one, but doubling down. The 2 children, and this is big, the Bible's saying a lot. A lot with this line. The 2 children struggled with each other in her womb. So from the get-go, the Bible is trying to articulate, it's trying to tell you that, it's foreshadowing tension between the twins. So she asked the Lord about it. Why is this happening to me? The Lord said, the sons in your womb will become 2 nations. From the very beginning, the 2 nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other. And here's the big line. You ready for this? Your older son will serve your younger son. Bam, bam, bam. What? This was unheard of. This is breaking all the trends. This is defying the cultural norms. This is a total upside down shocker moment. God is saying, hey, the firstborn, the big guy, the big kahuna, the older boy is going to serve the younger. This is a really big deal in the ancient Middle Eastern culture. It did not happen. The idea of the younger kid getting the inheritance and taking charge of the family, it just didn't happen. It always went to the older son. And so you see here in God's character a willingness to surprise, a willingness to upset the norms, a willingness to do things that we can't predict, things that we find counterintuitive, things that for us seem like head-scratching moments. And we find that throughout the entire narrative, that throughout the Bible, God surprises us. God does stuff we don't expect. And here's an early example where we see that really clearly laid out for us. By the way, the best example of God doing something you don't expect would be Jesus coming in the flesh, incarnation, death and resurrection, coming back from the dead. That would be a good example of a surprise. Whoa. So here's an example of a big upset, upside down kingdom surprise kind of moment. The older son will serve the younger son. All right, so who are these kids? What's going on? When the time to give birth, Rebekah discovered she indeed had twins. They did not have all the fancy gizmos and gadgets that we have. You know, she probably didn't even know that she was having twins till pretty farther on in the pregnancy. The first one was very red at birth and covered with thick hair like a fur coat. A little hairy guy, a little fur ball. And they named him Esau. So Esau is the older kid, older brother. Esau. Footnote. Esau sounds like a Hebrew term that means hair. So he's a little hairball. Comes out with a rug. Then the other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel. Interesting. So they named him Jacob. Jacob sounds like the Hebrew word for heel, which also means deceiver. Ooh, interesting. So the Hebrew word for heel and deceiver can be used kind of interchangeably depending on the context. And in this case, Jacob and everything that follows, Jacob, the younger guy, the surprise guy, not only is a surprise because God says he's gonna get the inheritance, but his character is questionable from the get-go, from birth. Jacob is in and of himself is a surprise beginning to end. He's not the kind of guy you expect. Like when you think of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you expect Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to be upstanding, paragons of the faith. But what you find in this messy family, you find Abraham passing his wife off as his sister. Isaac takes a page out of his dad's book once. And Jacob, you want to talk about deception? Jacob takes the family tradition and heritage of deception and being a deceiver to a whole new level. Jacob perfects deception. And yet, despite his messiness and questionable character, God is going to work through him even so. Woohoo! Gives hope for us all. If you've ever looked at yourself in the mirror and been like, oh yeah, definitely not a paragon of faith, know this, you too are in good company with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yes, that's right, the patriarchs of the faith all had questionable character. I love it. Okay. As an example of Jacob's practice and character, he dupes his older brother into selling his birthright. Check this out. As the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman. I like this guy. But Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. So Esau is kind of the outdoorsy, ragamuffin kind of guy. Jacob is the intelligent, stay-at-home, smarty pants. Isaac loved Esau. Ooh. So one of the things that you'll find in the ancient biblical narrative is, and it's not cool, it never ends well for anybody, is preferential treatment of kids. Not cool, man. Not cool. It always ends up bad. Loving one kid more than another, not cool. And every time it happens in the Bible, bad stuff follows. Don't do it. Stay away from it. Learn from their mistakes. Isaac makes the mistake of preferential treatment for Esau because he's an outdoorsman himself. He enjoyed eating wild game. He likes his venison jerky, But Rebecca loved Jacob. So you even get this tension in the marriage going on here. Isaac prefers Esau. Rebecca prefers Jacob. Isaac's an outdoorsman. Esau's an outdoorsman. Rebecca sits at home, likes to hang out around the tent with Jacob. One day, when Jacob was cooking some stew, now that in and of itself is interesting because that would have been considered women's work. Okay? You're not supposed to do that. This is not what Jacob's supposed to be doing. But, well, he likes to hang out at home with mom. So he's cooking a meal with mom. Esau comes home from the wilderness, exhausted and hungry. Esau said, I'm starving. Give me some of that stew. Red stew. This is how Esau got his other name, Edom, which means red. So he's making some meat and potato stew, and Esau's like, yeah, give me a bowl of that. Jacob's like, okay, but first, trade me your rights as the firstborn son. Esau's been on the road. He's hard-pressed. He's been doing the outdoors thing. He's not thinking clearly. He sees food. He's like, I'm dying of starvation. What good is my birthright to me if I die? That won't do any good. Jacob sees the opportunity and snags it up and be like, sure, I'll give you some of my stew. But I get your inheritance. I'll give you my stew if you give me your rights as the firstborn for inheritance. And the guy does it. Like, I don't know. Esau, not the brightest. Not the sharpest knife in the drawer. You must swear that your birthright is mine. So Esau swore an oath, thereby selling all his rights to his firstborn brother Jacob. Looks like God's gonna be right again. Jacob gave Esau some bread and lentil stew. Esau ate the meat, got up and left. And tension grows between the two. He showed contempt for his rights as the firstborn. So there you go. Jacob, deceiver, Decepticon. He takes advantage of the opportunity, we'll say. Right? Takes advantage of the opportunity and gets his brother to swear over all of his rights as the firstborn. Now, okay, where do you think Jacob learned deception? Here's the title of the next one. Isaac, the father, deceives Abimelech. Abimelech's a local guy, local king. So deception runs in the family, let's be honest. All right, what I want to get to, though, is the next part. Here we go. After Jacob has stolen, as he has cleverly taken over the rights to the family inheritance, there is one other big thing still out there. And that would be blessing. All right, what in the world is the Bible talking about? Jacob steals Esau's blessing. What's going on here? So, even though Jacob now has the rights to kind of the property and the tents and the goats and the material possessions, there is the immaterial possession. There is the promise of God's favor. There is the idea that just because Jacob gets the inheritance in material wealth does not mean that he is going to get God's blessing, that the promise will travel through him and that God will continue to be close to him and walk with him. And so now we get a story about how he steals Esau's blessing. All right, here we go. One day when Isaac was getting old, turning blind, he called for Esau, his older son, said, "Son, I'm gonna die. I'm getting old. Before I kick it, I want to taste that yummy venison stew you make. Then I will pronounce the blessing that belongs to you, my firstborn son, before I die." So go get me some good old venison stew. Make it just the way I like it. And then I will pray to God on your behalf, saying, God, I want all the goodness you've showed me to now go on to my son, my firstborn son, Esau. Rebekah overheard what Isaac had said to his son. Now remember, who does Rebekah like? Jacob. So when Esau left, she says, Jacob, listen, I overheard your father saying something to Esau. He said, make the meal. Now, listen to me. Do what I tell you. Jacob, I want you to go out to the flocks and bring me 2 fine young goats. I'll use them to prepare your father's favorite dish. What's the saying about the way to a man's heart is through his stomach? Then take the food to your father so he can eat it and bless you before he dies. Tricky, tricky, tricky. So, Rebekah is going to try to pull one over on her own husband and get her preferred child into the driver's seat. But look, Jacob says, my brother Esau is a hairy man. He's a rug. My skin is smooth. What if father touches me? He'll see right through this whole trick. He'll end up cursing me. Go out, get the goats. Do what I tell you. I love Rebecca's in this is just like, just go get the goats, man. Do what I tell you. Mama knows best. So Jacob goes out and gets goats. Rebecca makes the meal. Then she took Esau's favorite clothes, which were in the house, and gave them to Jacob to put on. And then she covers Jacob's arms and neck, and she puts on the skin of the young goats. So Esau is hairy. She says, look, you just need to pass yourself off as Esau. Your dad's blind. He's blind as a bat. He's near death. He's going to have a full stomach. He won't know. So here, put on your brother's clothes. Take some of this goat fur and put it on your hands and act like that's you. He'll think it's Esau. So Jacob goes and takes the food to his father. Father, he said. Yes, my son, Isaac answered. Who are you, Esau or Jacob? And it shows you how blind the guy is. Jacob replies, it's Esau, your firstborn son. Deception. I've done as you told me. Here's the wild game. Now sit up, eat it, so you can give me your blessing. Isaac, this is great. He's like, something's up. How'd you get it so quickly, my son? Jacob, smart, sharp as a tack. The Lord your God put it in my path. He lies. He replied, but like, come on now. Isaac said to Jacob, come closer so I can touch you. Make sure that you really are Esau. So he smells something's fishy. But Jacob gets closer. Isaac touches him. Isaac says, the voice is Jacob, but the hands are Esau's. You're really Esau? Yes, I am. Okay. He eats the food. He drinks a little wine. Isaac smells the clothes, and he's finally convinced. Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of the outdoors, which the Lord has blessed. And then he does this big, beautiful prayer. He gives him a prayer and prays on behalf of Jacob in this case, that God would bless him and walk with him, and the blessing would be transferred to Jacob. As soon as Isaac had finished the blessing Jacob, and almost before Jacob had left his father, Esau shows up. Wah, wah, wah. Esau prepared a delicious meal, brought it to his father, and then he said, sit up, father. I got your meal here. Isaac's like, what? Huh? Who are you? I'm Esau. What in the world? Who just served me meal? Who I just ate? I have eaten already, and I blessed him, that being Jacob, just before you came. And yes, that blessing must stand. Oh, father, what about me? Bless me too, Esau. Isaac said, your brother was here, and he tricked me. He has taken away your blessing. Esau, no wonder his name is Jacob, deceiver, for now he's cheated me twice. For he took my rights as firstborn, and now he has stolen my blessing. I have made Jacob your master and declared that all his brothers will be his servants. I have guaranteed him an abundance of grain and wine. That's all I got. Shocker, Esau hates Jacob. So, let me synopsis recap for you. Messed up family gets more messed up. The younger guy gets one over on his brother, not just once, but twice. Now there's like infighting between the two of them. And, Esau knows how to hunt and kill and skin a deer, man. So Jacob ain't sitting around waiting for that. He's ready to kill his brother, it says, Esau began to scheme. I will soon be mourning my father's death. Then I will kill my brother. There you go. God's redemptive narrative. The promises of God lived out through this family. I'm gonna kill my brother. I mean, it puts into perspective. The messiness of humanity continues to travel through this family just as much as everybody else. So Jacob's got to beat a hot and heavy path, man. Rebecca's like, book it, dude. You got to get out of here. Go to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him there until your brother cools off. And she schemes and says, I'm sick and tired of these local Hittite women. I'd rather die than see Jacob marry one of them. So they come up with a scheme to send Jacob away under the pretext of getting married. And so that's what he does. Jacob flees. Isaac calls for Jacob. Don't marry any of the locals. No good. Go find one of the ones from back home in Haran, where we came from. May God pass on to you and your descendants the blessings he promised to Abraham. May you own this land where you are now living as a foreigner, for God gave this land to Abraham. So the promise continues from Abraham to Isaac, now to Jacob. So it's a little awkward because Jacob now is bailing out of the land that he's been promised, but he does it. And he heads on over to find his uncle Laban. On his way, he hangs out and camps, and he has a dream. Stairway to Heaven stems from this. Jacob's Ladder, you ever hear that before? Stems from this. It's this story in, what is this, 28? Yeah. Genesis 28, Jacob has a dream, and in that dream, he meets God. So apparently the blessing worked. I am the Lord your God, the grandfather Abraham, and the God of your father Isaac. The God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of your father Isaac. The ground you are lying on belongs to you. I'm giving it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. They will spread out in all directions, to east, west, north, south. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. What's more, I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go, and one day I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have finished giving you everything I have promised you. So, this is a third time we find God telling this particular family, I'm going to do these things through you and your family, even though it's messed up, even though it's super messy. This is the family God has chosen to work through. So there you go. That's Abraham, Isaac, and then the blessing travels on through Jacob. Jacob goes, hangs out with his uncle Laban for a little while, ends up making a fortune deceiving his uncle Laban. He ends up having some crazy things going on with his uncle Laban, and just like he got his brother so angry and so mad, he ends up getting his uncle Laban so angry and so mad. He does get a wife. He gets not just one but two. It's actually kind of a funny story because it's the only time Jacob gets deceived. The deceiver gets deceived, if you will. He shows up and meets his uncle Laban and falls in love with one of his daughters, Uncle Laban's daughters, named Rachel. Rachel's got a sister, Leah. Leah is the older sister, and the younger sister is Rachel. He goes to Laban. He says, Laban, I will give you my slave labor. I will work for you, indentured servitude for 7 years. This is the story I actually tell at most of the weddings that I officiate at the rehearsal, because it puts into perspective the length to which one will go to marry and to enjoy the companionship of a spouse. So Jacob shows up, falls in love with his girl, says, I'll work for 7 years. Laban's like, all right, 7 years? Yeah, okay, deal. So 7 years they date, 7 years he works for her. Gets to the wedding day. Wedding day comes, wedding day goes, wedding night comes, wedding night goes. And Jacob wakes up the next morning, rolls over, and he realizes that's not Rachel in bed with him. It's actually his sister, the sister Leah. So he marries the wrong girl. Either he had way too much wine to drink, or a veil was involved, or something else. But ends up marrying the wrong girl. Runs to Laban and says, Laban, what the heck, man? We had an agreement. Laban turns around and says, ha! Yeah, well, you know how it goes. The older sister's got to marry first. If you want the younger sister, you got to work another 7 years. Oh, all right. So he works another 7 years for this girl. 14 years in total, marries Leah first, and then after the next 7 years, marries Rachel. Gets Rachel. So the deceiver is deceived. Well, he gets back on his deceiving horse, though, because shortly thereafter, he ends up making a bunch of money off of Laban. So much money, in fact, that he ends up having to flee from Laban because Laban is probably going to hurt him. Laban's furious with him and ends up like hunting him down. So Jacob runs off, and he's scared for his life again. It shows actually another parallel that you'll find thematically, that God's favored people doesn't mean that they're safe. God's favored people often are in conflict with others, and as a result, often are fleeing, running for their lives. And you find that over and over again in the biblical narrative. Here's another example with Jacob. He flees from his brother Esau, and then he spends time with Laban. He ends up having to flee from Laban and heads back to his homeland, back to ancient Israel, rather, and back to where he left mom and back to where his brother was living. He's nervous about meeting up with his brother again, so he actually sends him a bribe. He sends a bunch of money ahead of him, and it works. He reconciles with Esau. Enough time has passed. Esau's like, water under the bridge. I'm doing fine. You stole all my inheritance. You stole the blessing, but I'm doing all right. I got a good thing going for me here, and water under the bridge. Jacob's like, really? Wow. Cool. So Jacob and Esau actually end up reconciling. So that's kind of cool. It's a good thing. The last thing that happens in kind of Jacob's story before you transition on to Jacob's sons is how Jacob ends up wrestling with God. Another famous story is where Jacob wrestles. Let's go look at it. Let's look at it together, and then we'll be done with Jacob. Yeah, here we go. 32. Sweet. Yep, there are the gifts. Here we go. We're in chapter 32, starting at verse 22. During the night, Jacob got up, took his 2 wives as servants, his sons, crossed the river. He sent over all his possessions. This left Jacob alone in his camp. So he's sending on everybody ahead of him. He's the last man back. And during the night, a man comes and wrestles with him. This is kind of a weird story, guys, but whatever. The man wrestles with him until dawn. And when the man saw that he could not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip, and it wrenched out of its socket. So he gives him a low blow and boop, pops his hip out. The man said, "Let me go, the dawn is breaking." Jacob says, "Not until you bless me." "What's your name?" the man said. "Jacob." And up until this point, you get this thing of like, who is this dude, this random stranger? Like, you can picture 2 guys hanging out. "Hey, buddy, how you doing? You got a fire? Can I come and join you?" "Yeah, sure, come join my fire." They're sitting around, they start talking, and, they start talking, and one thing leads to another, and soon they're like, "Hey, wrestling match?" "Yeah, let's do a wrestling match." So they have a wrestling match. Dawn is coming. And then all of a sudden, the tone changes, because this man all of a sudden changes Jacob's name. Anytime you have a name change, that's associated with something big. God does that sort of stuff. Changes of name is indication of changes of identity. So from now on, you will be called Israel. Jacob sounds like the Hebrew words for heel and deceiver. Israel means God fights. From now on, you will be called Israel because you have fought with God and with men and won. "Please tell me your name," Jacob says. "Why do you want to know my name?" the man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. So there's this sneaky kind of read between the lines thing going on of like, whoa, this wasn't an ordinary dude. This wasn't just some passerby that walked up and shared a fire with him. This was something big. Jacob names the place Peniel, which means the face of God, for he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared. The sun was rising as Jacob left. He was limping. And even today, the people of Israel don't eat the tendon near the hip socket. So this is Jacob's story. This is how it kind of coasts to a finish, if you will. Up and close and personal with him. The final patriarch, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob wrestles with God. Wrestles with kind of this. Wrestles with an. I don't want to say incarnation, because that's Jesus. Incarnation's different. But has some sort of experience. A theophany is the fancy word. Has some sort of experience where God reveals himself to Jacob, changes Jacob's name, and from then on, that's where you get that's where this whole thing with Israel comes from. That's where that name comes from. It's right here in the Bible. The first time you get the word Israel. Okay, from here on out, they're known as Israelites. This is why ancient Israel is called Israel. This is why modern day Israel is called Israel. This is where Israel comes from. It comes from this place in the Bible and this experience between God and Jacob. And it is, in many ways, I think a lot of theologians will say the quick and loose interpretation has to do with what it means to be in relationship with God. From now on, you'll be called Israel because you have fought with God and with men and won. That is to say that you and I, even in our day-to-day, we are in relationship with God and we fight with God, right? We give God grief. We challenge him. We push on him, and he pushes on us, and he challenges us. A lot of people have this image of like a very tame, nice God, just hippie, buddy, Jesus kind of God, and that's not the biblical God that we know. We know a God who is passionate, who is intimate, who is close, who has strong emotions, and actually can push on us at times and wrestle with us. And Jacob represents us in this way, that we wrestle with God at times in our lives. People will say things like, oh, I wrestled in prayer. And in many ways, they're picking up on this imagery of, why do you say that, wrestled in prayer? It's because this idea of you're wrestling with God, what he wants for you, what he's doing in your life, what this world has. You're striving and struggling in relation to God and what God is up to. And Jacob does that. So we inherit that mantle of relationship where we indeed struggle with other people, other men and women, but also we struggle in relation to God, that there's this relationship with God, this back and forth with God himself as well. So kind of a cool thing actually in that regard. Holy cats, it's 8:28 already? Hot dang. You guys have been quiet. Super quiet. Come on now. Where's all your questions and commentary? I've been waiting for your questions and commentary. You guys have been like super quiet on me. Did I put you all to sleep? Did you all stop watching? No, you're all there. I can see it. You're there. Y'all just went quiet. That's okay. All right. We're going to wrap up though. What do you think? Yeah, totally true. Totally true. So later on, yeah, that's what we're going to pick up next week. Good call, Michelle. So the deceiver is once again deceived. Michelle just picked up that Jacob, this whole thing with Jacob and deception is really something that keeps moving all the way through. Jacob deceived again in thinking Joseph was dead. So when we get to Jacob's kids, yes, the deceiver is deceived once more, which is kind of a neat thing. Good call, Michelle. And that's what we're going to look at next week. We're going to get Joseph. So there you go. For your homework, guys, watch Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. That's what we're covering next week, Joseph. Though we'll probably move a little bit quicker through Joseph. I wanted to spend some real intentional time looking at the Bible with you, looking at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because these guys are really like the big three that form the foundation for... they're the patriarchs. Joe, class next week, election night. Oh, hey-o. Gosh, I didn't even think about that. It is the election next week. Oh, man. Shoot, dang. Here's what I'm thinking. I want to be dedicated to being able to be sure that you guys continue to get the content. And for some of you, Tuesday night works well. Next Tuesday night might not work for many of you because it is the election. And yet, if I put something out there, you will be able to watch it later in the week as well. So I think that's where I would go, is to say, yes, class next week, same time. And I will totally understand if a lot of you just watch it later on in the week. That's cool by me. Of course, you guys can watch it whenever is conducive and works for you guys. But I know that's for some of you, it will be important to have it. You've got your routines as well. So yeah, good question, Joe. I'm going to, until further notice, I'll stick with Tuesday night, and then yeah, you just have to maybe do replay if you're cool with that. Sweet. Good question. Thank you. That's a really good one. I wanna yeah, I'm trying to prioritize making sure you guys have that consistency for you. Good deal. Yeah, polls will be closed by then. That might be true too. That's probably true too. Yeah. So we'll have to see. And well, I won't make any commentary about the election. Boy, that's tempting too, though. I was gonna say, regardless, even we've been pretty good about. I've been trying to be pretty good guys about wrapping up around 8:30 for you. So, yeah, it depends. Some of you, I'm sure, will be at different parties, watch parties, and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that's the way to go. We'll do that. Cool. Other questions that you guys have? Oh, that's a cool one, Chris. Yeah. Okay, I'm with you. So Chris is just saying the idea of foreshadowing with Isaac carrying wood up the mountain for sacrifice. Yeah, totally. You can see that, how that's basically that. Good call. That's a parallel with Jesus, and lots of New Testament writers, lots and lots of New Testament commentaries pick up on that. They try to pick up on the parallels between Isaac in like a father-son relationship kind of going on over and against Jesus and God the Father, right? So God spares Isaac, Abraham's son, but is willing to actually sacrifice his son, which shows the lengths through which he will go in order to save Abraham and Isaac. So yeah, but the parallel is strong. Absolutely. The parallel is hugely strong between Jesus and Isaac, carrying wood up the mountain, Jesus carrying the cross up Golgotha, the mountain, the mountain called the skull, So yeah, I mean, that's a really big thing. And he did it without mumbling or complaining. Yeah, totally true, right? You didn't see, that's true. Here you have Isaac kind of being like, Dad, what's up, man? Where are we going? What's happening? And then you got Jesus who's just like, yep, doing his thing. Totally. I love it. Yeah. So that's a good parallel. That's a really strong one. A lot of people see Isaac as, people make the case that Isaac is the first martyr. I think I mentioned that last week, but the idea, even though he doesn't actually die, that's what's so weird. It's got to do with his willingness, that he's willing, theoretically willing. Actually, the Jewish Talmud, which is the formal, accepted Jewish commentary on the Bible, has an additional story that rabbis use a lot on the perspective of Sarah in relation to Isaac, kind of getting at and wondering what it would have been like for Sarah to see Isaac and Jacob packing up the donkey or gathering wood and walking off into the sunset. Like what was it like for her as the wife and as the mother to see? Did Abraham whisper the night before, like, honey, I got something to tell ya. Or, you know, could she just tell in his body language? Did he cry himself to sleep the night before? Like, you left to speculate all these kind of neat thoughts. And a Jewish rabbi came up with a story trying to capture the perception of what it would have been like to be Sarah as she witnessed her son and her husband walking off. And then conversely, what was it like to see her son and her husband come home? And the significance of what it was like to see, you know, them coming back together. Yeah. Kind of like, yeah, you can pick up probably on some Mary undertones there, on a willingness, and yeah, we could probably draw on some Mary undertones and the larger story. Yep, love it. Good thoughts, good commentary. Dig it. Nice. Anything else tonight, guys? Big stuff. Cool. Hey, I want to give a shout out to Joe Morrow, who tagged people. Thank you, Joe. Guys, I love when you tag someone if you think they might be interested in this, because it helps people know that it's happening and it's out there. So just a word of encouragement. Appreciate that, Joe. Guys, if you think you might know somebody who might enjoy this, do me a favor, drop them a tag, and then that way they know that it's all happening. So coolio. Well, as always, guys, thanks for hanging with me tonight. Always got stuff going on around Christ Church. You guys already know that. This is just one of many things that's happening around Christ Church. Hey, and we were talking about polls, and we were talking about voting and election. It is just a week away. But in between that, we've got Sunday, and on Sunday, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10:30, we got services, and we are in the middle of a sermon series. We're wrapping it up on Sunday called Under God, talking about faith, politics, and the intersection of the two. What does it mean to be a Christian in light of our political system and in light of the task laid before us to participate in that political system? How do we do that in God-honoring, healthy ways? What does it mean to be a nation under God? Just a really interesting series that Pastor Bob has been guiding us through. This past weekend, he talked about unity and what is it like to be indivisible, and how in a culture and in a country right now that is so polarized, you know, what is the Christian role to speak a word of unity and the witness opportunity therein. So just a word of encouragement. Come join us 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10:30. Come and be with us. Otherwise, join us, on site or online. As always, on site or online. You can tune 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10:30. Hang out with me again on Thursday morning meditation. Love to have you join me Thursday mornings at 7:30 a.m. 7:30 a.m. You can come hang out with me. We do scripture reading, and then we do prayer and Holy Spirit shout outs and God stories and stuff like that. So so thanks for hanging out with me tonight. Thank you, Susan. Good night. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being a part of it. John Harrell, happy birthday, man. Hope you had a great Tuesday. Happy birthday, buddy. And thanks to all you guys for tuning in, being part of the C3 stream tonight. Thanks as always. God bless you. Keep being a church that lifts lives, elevates Christ, and keeps reaching people who aren't here yet. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you Thursday morning, and if not Thursday morning, we'll see you on Sunday. God bless everybody. Have a great night. Thanks for hanging out.